Welcome back to Superbly Said Advanced English Vocabulary and Phrases.
Yeah, and today's source material comes directly from a SpeakDuo lesson, so we're really focusing on language meant strictly for advanced English learners. It's,
Right.
all about the subtle psychology behind how we communicate in high-pressure situations.
Exactly. But before we get into the psychology of these phrases, just a quick tip for you listening. You can go to SpeakDuo.com to meet new people from around the world practicing English on video calls to become more confident with their speaking abilities.
Yeah, it's a really great resource.
It really is. So let's just jump right in. In this deep dive into the source material, we are examining 8 highly specific idioms and phrases. We'll be exploring their nuanced differences from similar words and showing exactly how to use them with work colleagues with a boss or when answering those tricky IELTS speaking part 2 questions.
Which is vital, right? Because at an advanced level, you aren't just learning definitions anymore.
No, definitely not.
You're learning how to accurately describe, complex human behavior.
Okay, so let's unpack this by starting with a theme. We have absolutely all experienced the sheer annoyance of repetition.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically when communication breaks down because people simply won't let things go. Our first phrase is to harp on about something.
Right, which the source defines as repeatedly talking or complaining about something in an annoying way.
But I want to clarify the exact boundary here. How is harping different from just emphasizing a point?
That's a good question.
Like if my boss repeats a new safety rule every single morning, is she harping on about it?
Well, that is a crucial distinction to make. What's fascinating here is the underlying intent,
Yeah.
and the direction of the focus.
Okay.
Emphasizing is professional. It's forward-looking. So your boss emphasizes a safety protocol because she wants a future outcome to be successful and secure.
Right, right.
Harping, on the other hand, is annoying. It's highly repetitive, and importantly, it is almost always stuck entirely in the past.
Okay. So it's the difference between, let's make sure we hit the deadline next time, and I can't believe you missed that deadline 3 weeks ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Emphasizing builds up, but harping tears down. Think of a classic work scenario. Let's say you made a minor formatting mistake on a report.
Happened to the best of us.
Right. You caught it, you fixed it, you apologized, and the client is perfectly happy, but you have that one colleague who keeps bringing it up in meetings weeks later.
Ugh, the worst.
Right. They say, well, let's just make sure we don't do what you did on the Q3 report. They're harping on about a minor mistake long after it was completely resolved.
Yeah, that immediately paints a picture of a very frustrating colleague.
It really does.
Which actually transitions us perfectly to phrase number 2. Because sometimes that repetition goes beyond just being annoying and becomes, genuinely malicious.
Oh, yeah.
The phrase is to rub something in. And the definition here is to repeatedly remind someone of their mistake or your success in an annoying way.
Yeah.
Now, let me push back a bit on this one. Isn't that just gloating? We already have a perfectly good word for celebrating a win.
We do. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of human behavior, gloating and rubbing it in are very different social mechanics.
How so?
Gloating is mostly about the speaker. You win a race, you celebrate yourself, you say, I'm the best, I'm the fastest. It's arrogant, sure, but it's self-centered.
Okay, I see.
Rubbing it in actually requires a victim. It is actively and maliciously poking the other person's wound to make them feel smaller.
Oh, wow. So gloating is, look how great I am, but rubbing it in is, look how great I am, which means look how terrible you are.
Precisely.
Right.
You're using your success or their failure as a weapon. And, for those of you preparing for something like an IELTS Part 2 speaking exam.
Oh, this is a great context for that.
Right, where you might be asked to describe a time you had to stay calm. This is a perfect phrase to showcase advanced vocabulary to the examiner.
Because it shows you understand the emotional dynamic.
Exactly, because it demonstrates emotional intelligence. You could describe a coworker who keeps pointing out your missed deadline during a high-stakes meeting.
Right.
You could tell the examiner, I try to stay calm in the office, but sometimes I have to firmly point out their own mistakes just to stop them from rubbing it in.
That is brilliant. It immediately tells the examiner exactly what kind of toxic environment you are dealing with without having to use basic words like mean or bad.
Exactly.
So moving from annoying colleagues to actual deceit. Our next theme is deception and belief. Our third phrase is to take someone for a ride.
Yeah, meaning to deceive or cheat someone, often to gain money or an advantage.
But wait, let's say I go online, I buy a fancy new coffee machine, and it turns out to make terrible coffee. Was
Yeah.
I taken for a ride, or did I just make a bad purchase?
Well, a bad purchase is usually just an accident, right? Or maybe poor judgment on your part. The coffee machine works, it just isn't to your taste.
Fair enough.
Being taken for a ride requires an orchestrator. It implies intentional, coordinated deception by another party. Ah, so there's a plan behind it.
Yeah, you didn't just stumble. Someone built a trap specifically for you to fall into.
I see. So the malicious intent has to be there. It's the difference between a product being disappointing and a product being an outright scam.
Yes. Let's look at another IELTS Part 2 scenario.
Okay.
Perhaps responding to a prompt about a time you had to ask for a refund. You wouldn't use this phrase for a shirt that just didn't fit.
Right, because that's not a scam.
Exactly. But you could say, the seller promised a brand new boxed product, but delivered a heavily used, damaged one.
Oh, yeah, that's a scam.
Right. I immediately realized I was being taken for a ride. I asked for a refund and warned others online so they wouldn't get taken for a ride too.
That's a great example. It shows the examiner you understand that you were the victim of an active scam, not just a passive misunderstanding.
Exactly.
Which naturally brings us to the flip side of the scam, the psychology of the victim. Phrase number 4 is gullible.
Right. Which describes someone easily fooled or too ready to believe things without checking. Now, I want to play devil's advocate here. Isn't it generally a good thing to be a trusting person? We want to trust our friends, our family, our colleagues.
Of course we do. But being trusting is a positive social trait that builds community. Being gullible is actually a cognitive blind spot.
Good line spot.
Yeah. It means you lack basic critical thinking or fact-checking skills. Trusting someone means you believe they have good intentions based on evidence, intuition, or, a history with that person.
Right. You have a reason to trust them.
Exactly. Being gullible means you will believe a completely absurd rumor just because someone said it out loud with confidence.
So it's about the presence or absence of evidence.
Yes.
So if I'm talking to my boss about a new cybersecurity protocol at work, I might mention how easily someone could fall for a phishing email.
That's a perfect example.
I could say, he believed a prank message asking for his passwords and later felt really silly for being so gullible. It highlights a lack of verification on his part, not just a surplus of kindness.
Exactly. It's the total suspension of critical thought.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Sometimes people in the workplace don't outright lie to you. They don't explicitly take you for a ride.
Right.
Instead, they just create a massive mess of the facts, so you can't figure out who is to blame. This brings us to our next theme, confusion and unclear boundaries.
Yes. Phrase 5 is to muddy the waters.
And the source defines this as introducing unrelated topics or old disagreements during a calm discussion, so the main issue is ignored. Now, is this like playing devil's advocate?
Well, it's a very common comparison, but the nuance is entirely different. Playing devil's advocate is supposed to be constructive.
Okay.
You introduce an opposing view to test the strength of an idea and ultimately clarify the truth. Muddying the waters is a deliberate defensive tactic used to avoid accountability by actively destroying clarity.
Oh, so it's a smokescreen.
Precisely. Imagine you are in a challenging meeting with upper management.
I'm sweating already.
Right. You're trying to figure out why a specific product launch failed last month. Someone in the room, perhaps the person responsible for the failure, suddenly starts bringing up an old budget disagreement from 3 years ago.
To distract everyone.
Yes. They are introducing unrelated topics to muddy the waters so the main issue is ignored. They don't want clarity. They want confusion, because confusion keeps them from getting fired.
That is a phenomenal phrase to describe office politics.
It really is.
And speaking of professional environments, that leads us to phrase 6, a gray area, meaning a situation that is unclear or not easily classified as right or wrong.
Right.
But how does this differ from a classic dilemma? If I have a hard choice to make, isn't that a gray area?
Not necessarily. This raises an important question about how we make decisions. A dilemma gives you defined choices, usually 2, and very often both of them are bad.
Like being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. You know exactly what the options are. You just don't like the consequences of either. A gray area means the rules themselves haven't even been written yet. There are no defined boundaries to choose from.
Right. So a dilemma is, do I fire this toxic employee or do I risk losing this major client? The choices are clear, but painful.
Yes.
But a gray area is more structural. For example, in a workplace discussion about HR policy, you might be talking about using personal phones for company business.
Which is very common these days.
Yeah. You could tell your boss, sharing account passwords on our personal devices feels like a gray area between convenience and privacy. The policy literally doesn't exist yet.
That's a perfect example. Technology often creates gray areas faster than companies can write rules for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Or even in your personal life, you could say, deciding who should pay for a shared gift when some friends make more money than others can be a real gray area.
Yeah.
There is no strictly correct answer. It requires negotiation.
Exactly. And when the rules are in a gray area, our original intentions often fall apart entirely. Which brings us to our final theme: lost plans and endurance.
Yes, this is where we figure out how to handle the outcome when things go wrong.
And phrase 7 is an absolute favorite of mine: to go out the window. This means plans, rules, or intentions disappearing or being ignored.
Right.
But is it just canceling a plan? If I wake up and say, I'm not going to the gym today, did my plan go out the window?
Not quite. Canceling is an active, deliberate, and usually rational choice. You look at your schedule, you realize you don't have time, you make a decision to cancel.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Something going out the window implies a sudden, passive loss of self-control or structure. It is almost always due to sudden temptation or a drastic change in circumstance. You didn't rationally cancel the plan was destroyed by the environment.
So my plan to eat healthy went out the window the second they served warm chocolate cake at the dinner party.
Precisely.
I didn't plan to cancel my diet. The cake just hijacked my brain.
That's exactly how it works. The intention just vanishes. In a professional context, you might be explaining to your boss why a strict project timeline failed. You wouldn't say you canceled the timeline.
Right, because it sounds like you just gave up.
Exactly. You would say, our plan for an early finish went out the window due to a sudden scope change from the client. It conveys that the situation escalated rapidly and beyond your initial framework.
Which leaves us dealing with the aftermath of those broken plans. Phrase 8 is to put up with something, meaning to tolerate an unpleasant or annoying situation without complaining much.
Right.
The nuance here between accepting a situation and putting up with it feels incredibly specific to me.
It is, and it's a profound psychological difference. Acceptance implies peace.
Okay.
You have processed the situation, and it no longer causes you any internal friction. Putting up with it means the annoyance is absolutely still there. You haven't made peace with it at all. You are just bravely gritting your teeth and tolerating it, usually for the sake of a larger goal.
So if I move to a new city, I accept that it rains heavily in London. It means I really don't mind the rain. But I put up with the rain in London because I love my career here. It means I still hate getting wet, but I endure it for the job.
Exactly. It's about endurance. Let's say you are discussing a remote work setup with a colleague. You might say, I love the space in my new apartment, but I really struggle to put up with the constant late-night neighborhood noise.
Or if you were drawing a professional boundary.
Right. You could say, I refuse to put up with poor internet for important work calls, so I'm upgrading my provider today. You are acknowledging the friction, not pretending it magically doesn't exist.
Okay, we have covered some serious ground today. 8 incredibly nuanced phrases about human behavior.
We really have.
Now it is time to test your active recall. For everyone listening, we are moving into the final segment of our deep dive, the Masterclass Quiz.
Yes. This is where you actually solidify what you've just heard. Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied.
Here are the rules for you listening right now. I'm going to ask a rapid-fire, multiple-choice question for all 8 expressions. I will announce option A, option B, and option C verbatim from the material. I'll repeat the target phrase, and I'll invite you to pause the audio to really test your memory.
And then we will immediately reveal the correct answer and tie it back to the examples we just discussed so it really sticks in your brain.
Okay, let's go.
Question 1. What is the best definition for the expression to rub something in? Option A. To systematically permanently erase highly sensitive financial documents long before a massive public corporate audit.
Definitely a mouthful.
Yeah. Option B, to intentionally physically massage a highly soothing medicinal ointment completely into an extremely sore muscle now. Or option C, to continuously remind someone of their past mistakes or your personal success in a remarkably deeply annoying manner. Again, the phrase is to rub something in. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer. The correct answer is option C. To continuously remind someone of their past mistakes or your personal success in a remarkably deeply annoying manner. And as a quick reminder of our earlier example, to rub something in is exactly what that toxic coworker does when they maliciously keep pointing out your missed deadline during a meeting just to make you feel small.
Spot on. Question 2. How is the phrase "to take someone for a ride" accurately defined? Option A, to actively, completely, successfully transport a deeply exhausted colleague entirely across a massive industrial campus. Option B, to intentionally deceive or completely cheat a specific person, very often to successfully gain a financial advantage. Or option C, to violently disrupt an organized public gathering in order to forcefully draw immediate attention to an urgent policy. The phrase is "to take someone for a ride." Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option B. To intentionally deceive or completely cheat a specific person, very often to successfully gain a financial advantage. Remember, the IELTS example we covered this is the scammer promising a brand new product but deliberately delivering a used one so they can trap you.
All right, question 3. If something happens to go out the window, what exactly does that mean? Option A, to enthusiastically, incredibly rapidly, forcefully, permanently, entirely utilize a remarkably great initial ongoing idea. Option B, to physically, securely, carefully, completely detach a heavy wooden object from its original metal frame to access air. Or option C, to totally disappear or be completely actively ignored, especially concerning established plans, rules, or intentions. The phrase is "to go out the window." Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option C. To totally disappear or be completely actively ignored, especially concerning established plans, rules, or intentions. Think of your strict project timeline at work completely dissolving the second the client changes the scope, or your diet disappearing when the chocolate cake arrives.
Question 4. What does a person mean when they refer to a gray area? Option A, a highly specific situation that remains totally unclear or is simply not very easily classified as right versus wrong. Option B, a significantly prolonged and intensely bitter argument completely dividing two rival political groups in the community. Or option C, a completely, entirely unexpectedly dangerous, severe mechanical failure resulting from a severely bad motor part. The phrase is "a gray area." Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option A, a highly specific situation that remains totally unclear or is simply not very easily classified as right versus wrong. This is the structural lack of rules, just like balancing convenience and privacy with shared passwords or figuring out who pays for a shared group gift.
Awesome. Moving on to question 5. Which of the following describes what it means to muddy the waters? Option A, to safely, successfully, properly, deliberately, firmly, safely, securely store a highly volatile liquid substance. Option B, to intentionally, actively, purposefully make a specific situation far more confusing or complicated than it needs to be. Or option C, to deliberately, completely, purposefully, actively ruin an ongoing professional plan or totally destroy a massive launch. The phrase is "to muddy the waters." Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option B, to intentionally, actively, purposefully make a specific situation far more confusing or complicated than it needs to be. This is that defensive tactic we discussed, like bringing up old, unrelated budget disagreements in a meeting just to avoid accountability for a current failure.
Question 6. What occurs when a person manages to put up with something? Option A, to remarkably, suddenly, deliberately, manually, forcefully, heavily shatter a surprisingly heavy industrial piece of metal. Option B, to completely, independently, entirely, accurately, smartly, perfectly predict the highly uncertain outcome of a global event. Or option C, to quietly, bravely, peacefully, completely tolerate a highly unpleasant or profoundly annoying situation without whining. The phrase is "to put up with something." Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option C, to quietly, bravely, peacefully, completely tolerate a highly unpleasant or profoundly annoying situation without whining. You haven't made peace with the situation at all. You're just gritting your teeth, like dealing with that constant late-night neighborhood noise or enduring poor internet.
Almost there. Question 7. What does it mean if you happen to harp on about something? Option A, to continuously, repeatedly, actively talk or loudly complain about a specific minor old issue in a deeply annoying way. Option B, to successfully, beautifully, perfectly, properly, effectively, gracefully, musically perform a highly complicated new song. Or option C, to deliberately, aggressively, actively, fiercely, entirely, firmly, forcefully, effectively, heavily destroy strict policies. The phrase is "to harp on about something." Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option A, To continuously, repeatedly, actively talk or loudly complain about a specific minor old issue in a deeply annoying way. This isn't professional, forward-looking emphasis. This is your colleague repeating a complaint about a typo long after the mistake was already fixed.
And question 8, our final question. What happens when someone is described as being gullible? Option A, a remarkably specific person who absolutely desperately wants to totally heavily dictate every single detail of an event. Option B, describes an individual who is extremely easily fooled or far too ready to simply believe things without checking first. Or option C, a thoroughly detailed and exceptionally complex F. The phrase is gullible. Feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer.
The correct answer is option B. Describes an individual who is extremely easily fooled or far too ready to simply believe things without checking first. This is the complete suspension of critical thought, like believing a silly office rumor or a phishing email without seeking any evidence.
And that is 8 for 8. If you made it through that quiz and tested your active recall, you are well on your way to truly mastering these nuances.
Yeah, and as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a broader thought to mull over. Advanced English isn't just about memorizing a dictionary so you can sound smart or pass an IELTS test. It's really about capturing the exact, subtle nuance of human behavior. The difference between emphasizing a safety rule and harping on about a mistake, or between a simple dilemma and a vast gray area. Well, that's the difference between basic communication and true emotional intelligence.
It's all about precision. The right phrase acts as a shortcut to explaining extremely complex social dynamics.
Exactly. So take a look at your own professional conversations this week. Ask yourself, are you communicating with that kind of precision? Are you successfully navigating the gray areas, or are you accidentally muddying the waters?
It's a great question to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. Keep practicing, keep aiming for precision, and we will catch you next time.